People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A First Time for Everything. I am your host, Juliet Rose, and tonight we are being joined by Doug Lawrence. Doug, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
I sure can do that. So I'm a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, so I served for 25 years, got bounced all over the great frozen north, and lots of great experiences as a result of that. I am a international certified mentor. So I work with people, I mentor them from all walks of life and all over the world. And I'm working on creating the certification process for a grief mentor. So to be able to use mentoring techniques to help people get through their grief and deal with things like that. I spent quite a bit of time earlier on in my second or third career, whichever one it is, developing mentor certification or partnering with somebody that can do that so that we had something that had some structure behind it and that there was some best practices and stuff like that that we utilized for that. So I'm, in addition, I guess, to give sort of the grounding effect is that I'm also a farm boy. And I grew up on the farm for, I guess it was about 18 or 19 years before I got tired of the farm life and moved off to the big city. So that's kind of a little bit about me, and without getting into a longer story.
Yeah, well, you have an interesting journey, because you did have, a different career before you got into writing. Was writing something you always wanted to do, or was that something that was triggered by a life event?
I guess when I think back to the first book, The Gift of Mentoring, it came. So I went through RCMP training. There was a group of 32 of us. A troop is what they referred to. And one of my troop members retired, left the force early. He left after only 5 years. And what he used to do was every morning when he'd get up in the morning, he'd type out an inspirational message and send it off to his kids. And what ended up happening was somebody came along and said, Jim, what are you doing? You should, take all that stuff and put it into a book and get it out there. And Jim, you could do speaking engagements, and you could do this and you could do that. You could do all. The world is yours. You should be doing something with it. So Jim did, and he put out Notes from Papa was his book that he did, his little memoir book. And he turned around and said to me, he said, Doug, it's time. It's time for you to write your first book. Take all your blog articles, smush them into a book, and get it out there, because it's something that people are, they want that sort of information. So you should give it your best effort to get it out there. So that's how I got started.
Yeah. So I know that, you and I spoke a little bit briefly just before we started, and you said that you lost your wife to cancer. And so you got kind of on this journey. So did the mentoring come after that?
After the loss of
Loss
my,
of your wife? Mm-hmm.
actually, no, the mentoring came first. It would have been, in the probably 2000, around thereabouts, I think it was, and Deborah passed in 2021. So I think I had my first book, or my second book, You Are Not Alone. I think that was just being released when she passed away.
Yeah, well, and I kind of mentioned this to you prior to. I'm familiar. I actually lost a child to cancer as well, so I'm definitely familiar with grief. My question, I guess, to you is: having been a mentor before, you lost your wife, and then releasing books after. Do you find that you shifted in any way in how you wrote or how you presented, I guess, mentoring or grief because of your own experience?
I definitely know that you are not alone in grief, the silent pandemic. I know that the story, the story behind the book changed, and um, I had to make a decision as to did I want to follow that change or did I want to get back to the pathway that I was on beforehand. And what I ended up doing was, I let things go. I let that unfold the way it is. I will be guided by whoever is watching over me to guide me in the right direction. And, I know we actually had a conversation today where we're looking very much at another shift. And it's going to be a shift that, from my perspective, that's closer to me and my sense of purpose. And so it's a journey that's going to be somewhat easier to take, but the end result, the outcomes are going to be far greater.
Yeah, for sure. What so when the first book, The Gift of Mentoring, when did that come out?
2014.
2014. And what was the feedback that you got on that book initially?
Very good, very good. In fact, I had a couple people come and say, reading your book, it's like I'm sitting on a park bench right beside you, and I'm listening to everything that you're saying, as I'm going through and reading your book. So it was somewhat of the push or the nudge that I needed to sort of say, okay, this writing could be all right. Maybe you might want to give it another shot just to see if that's what if that's the pathway that you want to take, and if you do, for what purpose.
Sure. And are these is your book more like a workbook, or is it more like, I guess, kind of like a guide?
It's a guide, but there's no buts in life, but and then I do it again. But, it's what I found was that there's stories inside the book. And usually what I do, like if I'm on a podcast or something, I'll talk about Deborah's story or my story, or this is a combination of Deborah's and my story. And what I've done is, like in You Are Not Alone, there's reference to a traumatic event that both Deborah, my wife, Deborah, and I both experienced together. There's a traumatic event that took place that I sometimes will share, depending upon who my audience is and how comfortable I am, but more importantly, how comfortable they would be or will be if I tell that story.
Yeah. I mean, if you're comfortable telling it, I think our listeners are pretty open-minded.
So I was stationed with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, stationed in this small northern community. And it was in the middle of winter. We were, and actually Deborah was there as well. How ironic. But Deborah was there as well, and she was staying with her aunt and uncle and doing making some money. And unbeknownst to her, she was in the process of going to be asked to get married. So there's another sub story that goes with that. I used to refer to her as my photo album bride, because I was over at her aunt and uncle's place one night for dinner, and they hauled out a family photograph, an album, and we were flipping through, and I see this picture of this absolutely breathtaking young lady, and I say, "Who's this?" And they said, "Well, that's our niece." And I said, "Get her up here." And that's the end of the story. So back to the story you wanted me to tell. So we're having middle of winter, and we're putting together a men's hockey team that's going to travel down the highway a ways, travel down the gravel road to the neighboring community. And we're going to have this fun hockey game where, we give it our best shot. So we make the choices who's going to go on the team, and this young lad, he's about 16 years of age, young lad, he made the team, and he was absolutely over the moon, just ecstatic, so proud of himself. And we were, we were very proud of what he'd accomplished as well, and he was going to do a good job for us against the rival local town. And so he goes home to tell his parents what had just taken place, and get them to help him celebrate. So he gets home, he goes into the house trailer, whatever it was, and he finds that here's his parents, and they're absolutely intoxicated beyond belief, and he's devastated. He doesn't know what to do. So he goes into the bedroom where they store all the firearms, and he takes one of the guns, and he takes his own life. Oh, wow. And it gets even tougher, because it's a sudden death by suicide. So we have to do an autopsy, and the closest morgue is 8 hours away, 40 below weather, gravel roads, and not the best for traveling by yourself. So anyhow, we were trying to deal with that, and my boss wasn't wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. So he offloaded responsibility to transport the body to the closest morgue, and they did a short straw exercise where they ended up making sure that Deborah got the short straw, and she ended up getting blessed, if you want to call it that, to go with me on this 8-hour journey, and she ended up having to help me with part of the transportations, and we won't get into any of that, but she ended up having to help. And so then coming home, she was having to process all that stuff that took place, and it was difficult for her. Me, on the other hand, we get home, and I get home, and I'm wound up really tight, and I'm just not sure what I'm going to do to kind of get through this. And I'm mindful of Deborah and what kind of state she's in, but I still do my usual coping mechanism, which is I go to my cabinet in the kitchen, which is where I store all my liquor, and I grab a bottle of scotch and take the top off, throw it away, and I proceed to drink the bottle of scotch. That was my support structure, mental health, PTSD, coping mechanism, which wasn't the greatest in the world. Because ironically, when I finished the bottle and woke up the next day, things hadn't changed much.
Right.
So that's the kind of the story behind that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I mean, that is true. I think it's important to talk about these things because so many people do find coping mechanisms and they don't really take things away. They just waylay it. And I went through that with my ex-husband when we lost our child. My coping mechanism was to deal with it. His was to drink. And then, so we weren't on the same, reality, and we couldn't, communicate about it. But I think that is a very valid thing to talk about because people do find ways to, what they think is get through it, but really they're just pushing it off until, the buzz wears off or whatever it is at that time. Did you always know you wanted to be a mentor, or did that really come from being a police officer?
It actually had nothing to do with being a police officer. It came from, I was job coaching university students. Mm-hmm. And what would happen is I would do some job coaching with a number of them, and they would end up taking, getting their resume, cover letter, all that stuff, and applying on jobs. And they actually would be successful in securing employment. And then they'd get into the workforce and something would happen that they didn't know how to deal with it. So they'd come to me and they'd say, Doug, this took place in the workplace and we don't know how to deal with it. What should we do? And so I'd say, well, what would happen if you were to do this, or this? And they said, well, we'll have to give it a try. And so then what happened is I did more referral after referral after referral. Then finally they said that, you should do this for a living. We can't afford to pay you, but I'm sure somebody can. And so, you should do this. You're good at this. And so that's how the mentoring started. And then it just kind of gained traction and after that.
So I know you're in Canada, correct?
Correct.
So what is that, I guess, that process to become a mentor look like in Canada?
Well, the easiest here in Canada, you can take training. I used to do lots of training of mentors. In fact, I think I trained, I probably had about 250, 260 hours of actual training of mentors here, but I also had a business partner who helped develop a certification for mentors. So we could actually provide you training and then provide a certification as at the tail end of that. And we actually delivered training and certification to, what was it? About 20 people, I think it was, in UAE, in Dubai.
Right.
And so, where were we going with that now?
I was just asking what the process was in Canada, because obviously in America things are different. Like in the US, it's different how you have to go about things. So I was just curious about how that process is. If somebody wanted to become a mentor in Canada, what would be the process?
So what I would basically, the first thing I would always ask somebody who, no matter where you lived, is how much mentoring have you actually done, and have you logged it or recorded it someplace that we can go back and take a look at it? Because if you've got 20 or 30 hours of mentoring, that tells me something different than if you only had 5 or 10. And we can judge the training, sort of customize the training in order to be able to help you get up to speed a little bit quicker. And so, because the whole approach is, validation or verification of your practical experience. So looking at your log and going through that, doing a couple case studies, answering a bunch of questions that deal with a mentor's profile. So, things about different statements that we would be looking at as far as, if I'm trying to think of an example, but it would be one very simplistically would be if this were presented to you, what would be some of the steps you would take to deal with that situation? And it's more important today than what it was, say, 6 months ago. As an example, is that mentoring is now slowly gaining momentum as being part of that support structure for mental health. In fact, my business partner and I, we had a conversation earlier today about the aspect of making some changes to the mentoring profile to include grief.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's a logical fit when you think of it, because who makes a strong or a really competent grief mentor? Somebody who demonstrates mentoring skills such as effective communication. They're good at listening and hearing and confidentiality, and and using my old friend, the Socratic method, for asking questions if need be, asking questions to help the individual find the answers on their own.
Yeah. And it's such an important thing. I think that when we look at mental health, and I know, again, we're talking about two different countries with very different systems to help people. In America, it's not great. But anything that offers that service to people, because I think there are a lot of people that, will look for different routes, I guess, to find that help. Sometimes because of finances, sometimes just because of comfort level. So yeah, I think that's really important.
I was just sorry. Didn't want to lose my train of thought. I've been taking some online courses that are grief mentoring related. And what I'm seeing or starting to find is that a lot of the practical experience that you would want to see or to have as part of the training isn't there. It's very academically focused on, it's the knowledge base, it's what you know, and it's not so much about, yes, it's what you know, but how do you apply that in, given situations? That's what's missing.
Yeah, for sure. I think life experience definitely is a valid, I guess, element to consideration with somebody that is looking at it as well. What I was going to say is I know that The Gift of Mentoring is your first book, but you do have two other books, and one of them deals with grief, right? Or both of them deal with grief?
The second book, You Are Not Alone, starts us down the path of grief. And then the third book, Grief, the Silent Pandemic, takes us full bore right into it. And, we talk about the different stages, if you want to, I hate that word.
Yeah.
The different steps. I'm struggling for a word, but steps will do. The different steps that you have, that you will go through, that you may go through if you've experienced a loss and you're in the various steps of grief.
Yeah, and I think, steps is tough too, because I'm thinking when you're saying that, because anybody that's been through it knows that it's not like a forward motion or a progress. It is like phases of coping. So you could go back, you go forward, you can go, you can get stuck in one for a very long time. You can skip over certain ones. I mean, it is definitely like outside of, like when I was going through there, like grief, these are the steps of grief or stages of grief. And I was like, sort of, but there's so much more to it than that, because like I said, sometimes you do get stuck somewhere, or you do skip over one, or, you circle back to one repeatedly. And a lot of it is learning to, I always called it embracing the pain, because that's how I had to do it. I had to be like, all right, the only way to deal with this, I'm going to embrace it, and embracing that and letting yourself go through that phase of grief.
It's like, today I'm experiencing denial. Tomorrow it could be anger.
Right.
And there's no prescribed path that you have to take. If there's 7 steps and we'll use that word for now, But if there were 7 steps I had to take, I did them in chronological order, and I didn't, I didn't allow myself to deviate from that order, and that doesn't serve much of a purpose. It doesn't, like, it kind of leaves you out there where you're trying to figure out, okay, I thought this was supposed to help me feel better, and it doesn't. What's wrong?
It can make you feel worse. Yeah, like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
So if somebody comes to you and they're going through a loss or going through grief, and you're mentoring them to help them kind of face what they're going through, what are some of the things that you work with them on, or how do you approach it to help them help themselves?
The big thing is, number one is, I've experienced to some extent what you're experiencing, and you need to just know that. You need to be comfortable that I've kind of walked in those shoes, and so I'm very mindful of wanting to demonstrate caring, so that you understand that I'm not going to fix it, but I'm going to listen, and I'm going to hear what you're going through, and I'm going to make sure that our conversation is confidential, that I don't share that unless you give permission to do so. I don't share that with anyone whatsoever. And the biggest thing that we can do together is to help each other. And I'll help you because I know you're going to help me work through what it is that, we're struggling with. And the last thing that I want you to understand as somebody that's wanting, to spend some time with me, is that it's okay to ask for help.
Sure.
Step out of the closet, extend your hand and say, I need help, and I'll be right there for you. It's my intention to walk beside you for your entire journey. And so I'm ready to begin today.
Yeah. So when you wrote those books, because obviously you're already doing this kind of like one-on-one with people, when you wrote the books, what was your intent? Were you just taking what your experience of what you were doing and putting it into words to reach more people? Or what was your intent in putting these books out there?
Well, you've pretty much touched on it. The big thing is that there was a story that had to be told, and the books, the two books, were probably the best way to get that story out there. It was to give people the tools that they needed in order to, if I'm battling post-traumatic stress, what do I have to do? Do I take your lead and crack open that bottle of Scotch whiskey, or do I do something else? And if so, what is it? And then with grief, it's I need help. I just need help. And I go see my counselor, my psychiatrist today, and 4 days or 4 weeks or sometimes 4 months later, there's an opening that I can go. And that's not good enough. I need to have somebody that I can talk to, that I can lean on a fairly regular basis. And 4 months down the road is not going to work.
No. Yeah. And for some people, like here, I know there you have to wait for appointments, and here people have to pay. And so a lot of times they don't go because they just don't have that kind of money. So giving people tools is definitely extremely important.
Giving them the tools, but also, we all need to put a roof over our heads, and, we need to stay warm in the winter. But I always tell people that if money is the issue, let's take it off the table.
Yeah.
If money's the issue, let's take it off the table. And because you shouldn't have to suffer pain and anguish and all of that simply because you don't have the money or the funds to pay for what it is you need.
Yeah. And I love that because I hear all the time people say, I'd love to, get therapy. I can't afford it. My insurance won't pay for it, or, whatever. And that's really sad because it's something that, to me, it's like water or air. You need it. Like you need access to mental health care. And yet it is so monetized, especially in this country, that the majority of people don't have access to that.
I was working on a very, very unique project, and they provided counseling services, and they provided access to psychologists, psychiatrists, and they got access to lots of different programs and stuff. But one of the things that they did was they brought me in, and I was the person that you could turn to when you couldn't get access to all those other resources. And so I would do kind of counseling, but we sort of shy away from calling it that. I would, try and find out. I would do some deep sea digging or diving to try and find out what the root cause was and what are some of the tools I can provide them with so that they can manage what it is that they're dealing with in the interim until such time as we can get them back in front of professionally trained staff.
Yeah, it's almost like kind of going to steps. It's like, it is kind of like steps, like, you're keeping them from completely falling off the cliff in the meantime, and that is critical. I mean, like you talk about the boy who killed himself because his parents, were inebriated. And you think about that, had he just had someone to talk to, someone to reach out to and say, hey, I'm going through it, that might have had a different outcome.
Well, and I had the conversation with myself a number of times, what if I would have taken him under my wing and said, let's talk to your parents in the morning and we'll see. We'll see what they think then, and I've had other situations where I had a guy that worked with me who ended up, unbeknownst to me, was suicidal and ended up taking his own life. And I had just thought of him that day that I should hop in my car and pop over and have a visit. And I didn't. Something else came up. And as a result of that, he took his own life. So, you kind of go, dang.
Yeah. But, and the other side of it, and this as well as I know this, is that you could have done all those things and it may not have changed the outcome.
Yeah.
We had a friend that committed suicide about 10 years ago, and I was talking to somebody else that knew him, and she said he came into the store that day and I was really busy, and so I couldn't stop, because he's a big hugger, and she's like, couldn't stop, and she didn't really like people touching. She said, I just really didn't want to have to hug him just because, like, I don't like people touching me, and I was busy, so I kind of not ignored him, but like she was doing her job. And she said, I kind of went on with that. And she said, and I said, that's not, like, you could have done that. You could have hugged him. You could have talked to him for an hour and it may not have changed it.
Yeah.
However, on the other side, it is important, I think, to have someone to talk to have somebody to reach out to when you need it. And that is so lacking. I mean, it really is lacking. Most people do feel very isolated and lonely. And I'm sure through, they saw those increase through COVID as well, because people then were even more isolated. So it is important to have accessibility to even books. I mean, I'm a big self-help book reader because I don't really like to tell people things. I'm the person that I'm going to tell you that and then try to make you feel better about it. So I like to read books because then I don't have to do that. So it is critical to have those type of resources out there.
You can take the stories that are in those books and with that's what I'm reading one right now that's very interesting. In fact, I was having a difficult time putting it down, and for me, that says a lot about the book, because I wouldn't say I have high standards, but to get and maintain my attention span takes a bit of work, and this book does just that. And the guy beats himself up pretty good over a situation that happens, and same sort of thing. If he's still alive, and he's using various coping mechanisms, counseling and stuff like that, some folks may not have partaken in, but he's in a pretty decent space right now, and he's doing what I do, which is, for me, the podcast, the speaking opportunities, the helping people, all of that's therapeutic for me.
Right.
That's like giving me a shot in the arm to prevent, the flu or something like that. I try to keep the sadness away by, I wish I could give it a shot in the arm, but I can't. But, you sort of look at things from that perspective.
For sure. And, I'm an author too. And I did, when I was younger, when my daughter was going through cancer treatments, I wrote nonfiction. And I've had it in magazines, and a piece I wrote was read in Washington kind of about that. And what I switched to fiction later in life, and you're talking about the shot in the arm of making yourself feel better, like that therapeutic. For me, I take a lot of those same kind of situations and I weave them into fiction, so that maybe somebody that wouldn't normally read a book like a self-help book, or wouldn't normally kind of broach that subject, will kind of get exposed to it through that. Now, I know that you have currently 3 self-help or nonfiction books. Have you ever thought about kind of weaving into storytelling to reach more people, or to kind of approach it in a different way?
Well, definitely the storytelling piece does. And I've actually had people, some close friends and that have said that that's a path that I should take a look at, is the lived experience, and weave that into a story. And yeah, I've thought of it, because with the you are not alone and the grief, there are some stories in there that I tried to weave with everything else. Like I tell the one of when, right at the time that Deborah was diagnosed with cancer, her family doctor had us take her right to emergency, because she said something's not quite right here and we need to get you checked out. So I drove her to the emergency at the hospital, and the story as I tell it talks about us sitting in one of the emergency treatment rooms, and the doctor coming in and runs a bunch of tests and so on and so forth. And long story short, ends up saying that, diagnoses her as, I think you've got cancer. And, oh, well, that's okay. We can just take treatment for that. No, not this type. This is spread, and it's spread fairly quickly. So, but, on the positive note, we do have, medication and stuff like that we can start, put you on that and start that going, which, had I have known what I know now, the chemo actually did her in more, because it weakened her system so badly that it was just horrific. But the one thing that I remember sitting on the edge of the bed in that treatment room and going, this isn't good, and I think my Deborah's going to die, and there's nothing I can do to help her. And so a story like that, which is it's a true story, is to be able to take that and kind of weave that through, the other places in the book that it's relevant.
Yeah, definitely. And I think at least in my experience, what I found is like, so many people go through similar situations. Like we all kind of at some point deal with some similar situations, but they feel heard. Like all of a sudden, like even though you've weaved it into a story and it's not quite, they say, "Oh, I'm not alone." Like your story, like your book, and that is really important because I think a lot of times the number one thing people feel is isolated when they go through something like that. So to have the ability to see that they're not alone, whether it is fiction or nonfiction, it does help them cope at least momentarily. Because I always say like coping isn't this thing that it's not healing. Coping is to get through. Healing is different. And so like it is sometimes just getting to that second, that minute, that day, that week, whatever it is.
And, sometimes you wonder, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling?
Yeah.
Because I wrote a couple blog articles because I was having one of those pity parties, and I was by myself for quite a bit of this period of time, and I thought, that's not fair. All this stuff going on, and who do I turn to? What do I do? How do I get past this? Who do I, so I wrote a couple blog articles, published them on LinkedIn, only then to have some of my closest friends send me a message to say, "Are you okay?" No, I'm not, but
no, I'm not. I was going to say like, yeah, nope. The answer is no.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is people tend to, they want you to be okay. They want you to be okay and they want to make it okay. Like people do genuinely, I think, care and they want to offer something. But part of the process is going through the process, right? Like you can't undo grief. You can't undo suffering. You have to go through it. I used to say after my daughter died, the only way to get, from A to C is, go through B, and that's B was grief. And that was just how it was, So I think that people have the best of intentions, but they don't quite understand unless they've gone through it.
Well, and they're reluctant to say anything because the last time I said something, I think I offended somebody. And so it's better that I don't say anything at all. And then a close friend will come and say, I don't bite. I'm not contagious. I'm not the one that had cancer, but I'm beginning to think or feel like I did. And, so kind of going through because one of the biggest things that I've found in the mentoring that I do is that people don't know what to say or when to say it or how to say it. So they sometimes choose to not say anything.
Yeah, no, totally. I think or they go to the like kind of like really, the kind of trite sayings, and that's almost worse. But I think to make an effort, and I know people say, "Oh, I'm sorry," like with my daughter, I didn't mean to bring her up. Please bring her up. Like, I want to talk about that. One thing you touched on earlier that I'd like to just kind of maybe explore a little bit more in the realm of mentoring and kind of like grief is you touched on PTSD. And for a long time, people believe PTSD or they, thought that PTSD was kind of solely related to people coming back from wartime situations. But obviously in psychology now we understand that that's not true. It's anybody who's gone through a traumatic situation. So is this something that you talk about in your books or that you talk about in your mentoring?
Both. So in You Are Not Alone, from what I recall, going back through sort of the various chapters and stuff, there was more focus in You Are Not Alone on PTSD versus Grief, the Silent Pandemic was very much focused on grief. Sure. And so for me, it was the realization that and what's interesting now that I'm starting to think of it is that I have my PTSD had a broader scope, so it appears now, than what it did, 2-3 years ago, because I have a better understanding of it, and I know that what I was experiencing and the nasty behaviors that I had developed, I know that those weren't normal, and I had to figure out how I was going to work with them and be able to somehow find something that was going to help me get through that before I had no friends left.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think awareness is key, because again, that's going back to that, a lot of people don't realize that that's what they have as PTSD.
Yeah.
They don't know that's what they're dealing with. So to sometimes make that awareness or put that kind of label on it, I think helps them understand then the path to address it.
And sometimes people with the PTSD, sometimes people are, I know we tried to get a couple men's groups going here that were dealing with PTSD and a number of other situations. And the biggest thing that we as males have that makes our life difficult is our ego, number one, and is the fact that, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's okay to say, I need help. It's okay to reach, to extend your hand outside that closet and say, I need help. I need somebody I can talk to. I need, I just need somebody, because I know I personally, I couldn't drive past the cancer hospital here without breaking down and crying. Yep. And it took me a long time to be able to. In fact, I went to see a counselor, and she helped. We did EMDR and a couple other modalities. She helped me work through it so that I could at least drive past the hospital and not break down and cry. I saved the crying for the grocery store.
Oh no, totally. I was going to say that. I moved away because I that will help. And then I literally would break down and I'd be grocery shopping and a song or something come on, or see a product, and I would just start bawling. So yeah, you can't run away from it. I'll just say you cannot run away from grief. So yeah. So talk a little bit. I know that you have the 3 books now. Are you planning to do more books in this series? Are you working on something now?
I've got something started, yes. I have to have a conversation with my team to sort of see where, who wants to be part of this next journey, and to what extent. It's different. I've now taken, and we actually had this when we launched Grief, the Silent Pandemic. Everybody was, pumped up and hyped and all that. And the big thing was, okay, so, what's next? And one of the things that kept being brought to my attention, and it's definitely something that I need to have a conversation with some close colleagues and that, or at least somebody who will listen and not think that I'm crazy, but because the book is grief and spirituality. And so I'm the sort of individual that is very open spiritually. I'm the individual that has experienced the spirit world quite frequently, and I know in the back of my mind, I know that there are others out there that are experiencing similar, but just are afraid to talk about it. And so I would like to kind of open the doors and and take a look inside to kind of see, what is going on. Because um, I think it would make a good read.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, like, for me, I'm not a religious person, but after my daughter died, I definitely researched like spiritual books, like, getting into like, I can't think of anybody right now title-wise, but I read so many, just kind of like, so I could feel in some way to maybe understand if there might be a connection, and that was important to me at that time because it helped me in my grief hold on to something, it gave me those little threads of hope, and that really did matter at that time. So yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Have you thought about doing workbooks with your books at all?
We talked about it, but it's never gone any further than just talking.
Sure.
So yeah, I could see doing a workshop.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
It would it's scary, but it would be good. Is that some of my experiences, like shortly after Deborah had passed, I had visitors, as I call them, visitors that would come to the bedroom. And, I remember the one time there was 3 or 4 young ladies that came running at the bed and were jumping in the air. And I said, just a minute, what do you want? And they disappeared. And so I'm thinking, oh, this is not going to make for a good night's sleep. And so I had that. And the other thing that I had started, and I actually tell people or suggest to people, tell is too strong. I suggest to people that maybe think about this, but it's to use or go to a medium or a psychic after you've lost a loved one and get closure.
Yeah.
And, for some folks it's difficult to do, but those that I have recommended that to, they have actually gone and done it. And ironically, they've gone back for a second and third visit.
Yeah, definitely. Again, those are tools. I mean, I do believe that. I think that's, being open-minded when you're going through it and finding what works for you. Obviously not everything works for everybody. Some people would be uncomfortable with that. Some people were comfortable in the, walls of a church. I wasn't. I did go to psychics and mediums actually after my daughter passed, and it did help for me. Again, but that's for me, and I understand everybody has a different path. So I love that you're open-minded about that because I can tell that's really beneficial to the people that you would speak to as well. We are getting close on time. So can you let everybody know where they can find you? Like if you have a website or where they can find your books, and if you have any like talks or events coming up.
So probably the best way to find me is you can go to the website. So www.talent.c, so talent with C on the end, little or big C. And if you go to the contact me page, you can send me a message and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. What works better is what we're finding that's working better for contact is LinkedIn, is send me a message on LinkedIn and I commit to getting back to you within half a day at the most. But probably the most effective use of your time is to just send me an email. And it's Doug.Lawrence, LAWRENCE, at talentc, so the word talent with the letter C on the end, .ca. And I guarantee you I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. So those 3 are probably the best way to get in touch with me. A lot of the people I'm mentoring today use those. Actually, they use LinkedIn or just a straight email. They found the best way for that. The 3 books, The Gift of Mentoring, You Are Not Alone, and Grief, the Silent Pandemic. All 3 books are available on Amazon.com. So you can search and I find that sometimes you go in and look for the book itself and you can't find it. If you put the title of the book and then my name right after.
That is the key.
That's the key.
Yes. Yeah, so people definitely check out Doug's books. They sound really good, especially if you're going through it. And we all do at some point. I mean, there's no way we all end up somewhere at the same point. So and I appreciate you coming on and talking tonight and really sharing your story. That's important for people to hear, because like I said, our sharing of our stories helps other people feel not so alone. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking tonight about what you've been through.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
For sure. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in. As always, this show will be available on YouTube after it's over as well. So if you didn't get to tune into all of it tonight, please tune in and remember to give us some likes. It helps us as well. And you'll get entered into our end of season prize package. And for everybody, don't forget, it's always time for Going In Now.